When you really look at it, Torchwood Series 1 was very low-key and low stakes, most of the stories ending up extremely self-contained without massive stakes. However, sequels tend to up the ante, and Torchwood Series 2 was no exception, deciding to expand the scale and scope of the Doctor Who spin-off. This was immediately clear with the opener Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, flexing a new tone and visual direction of the series compared to Series 1. However, it's easy to splash out and dress everything up all nice for a good first impression. The onus tends to be on the follow-up to prove it wasn't a one-off success. This follow-up would be Sleeper, written by James Moran. This is a highly ambitious episode of Torchwood, with one of the biggest scale stories the show had ever seen up to that point. It focuses on a woman named Beth who turns out to be an alien sleeper agent unknowingly spearheading the infiltration and potential destruction of the entire planet, with Torchwood needing to both prevent the invasion and help her come to terms with her own sense of self. Sleeper is often lost in the herd when it comes to Torchwood. You don't usually hear people talking about it compared to the other episodes in Series 2. However, is this relatively forgotten episode the sleeper hit of Torchwood Series 2? That was terrible. I'm so sorry.
Have a little faith with a dashing hero like me on the case. How can we fail?
Rather fittingly, Sleeper begins with a couple sleeping in bed before they hear an intruder in their flat. It's a very common and relatable fear, laying there in the dead of night half awake when you're suddenly interrupted by the terrifying prospect of someone breaking into your house. We've all thought about it, wondered what we'd do in that situation. So it's a good way to open the episode, tapping into those ordinary fears. However, in usual Torchwood fashion, the team arrives to find there's more to this situation than meets the eye, since one of the burglars was thrown out of the window and the other stabbed with some kind of blade. It's a brilliant mystery to set up. No possible explanation because nothing makes any sense. As PC Andy would say,
"Another one of your spooky doos, is it?"
I always like scenes like this, where the team just rock up to a crime scene to do some old-fashioned policing with their gadgets. I find it reminds you of the grounded nature of the show, this real-world feeling to it all, blending this surreal universe with our own everyday lives. Then at the hospital, the mystery only deepens as Gwen and Owen talk to Beth and Mike, but not actually clearing anything up, although Owen suspects Beth and Gwen suspects Mike, probably only picking the other one as to not agree with Owen. This is a lovely scene for the pair to almost clear the air between them after Series 1. The previous series had them very hormonal and always either shagging or fighting, but this scene essentially steps back and acknowledges that's all in the past. They're on the same page now as teammates and friends, so I really appreciate the change in their dynamic since they do have a lot of chemistry with their back and forths, so there's no need for any more sexual tension or arguing. After Owen sneakily assigns Gwen the task of waiting with the surviving burglar all night, the burglar reveals in his dying breath that it was Beth after all. So I guess that's a win for Owen's sussing skills then. Good for him. The episode then takes quite a dark turn as Beth is dragged into an interrogation by Torchwood without the right to a lawyer. As almost every cheesy intro of the show is hammered home, Torchwood is outside of the government and beyond the police.
Second left over the flyover, straight on at Budgeon's, right at the lights, then first left by the quick save.
However, this was almost never actually shown apart from them just kind of strolling into crime scenes and taking them over. It's not until Sleeper that we get a glimpse into just how extensive Torchwood's powers are, that they can just treat someone like this with no regard for human rights. Jack is borderline unrecognisable in this scene as he shouts at this poor woman who clearly doesn't know what she's expected to say, since she genuinely doesn't know what happened. We're so used to Jack being charismatic and charming, but here he's extremely aggressive, which is quite surprising to see. The same kind of anger we saw only briefly in Series 1. Although it's soon obvious why he's so aggressive, because it's the good old good cop bad cop routine, since Gwen swoops in to be all soft and understanding about the situation. I guess that's the benefit of having Gwen on the team, she knows exactly how to handle these kinds of interrogations. However, because they're Torchwood, they don't even need a confession because they work out it has to be Beth, since she somehow managed to generate an electromagnetic build-up, whatever that means. So the next step is finding out how and why this is happening. But as usual, it only gets more mysterious since they can't even take blood samples or cut her skin. She's basically Wolverine without knowing it. Now, you don't have to be a secretive alien hunting operative to realise if someone can mess with lights and their skin can't be pierced, they're probably an alien. Even Janet the Weaver evil cowers in fear of her, so all the signs point to her being an alien. The team are just frustrated they can't get Beth to admit it, because she's adamant she's a human. It's a very interesting concept for an episode. An alien among us that doesn't even know their true nature. It's been done to death in almost every piece of science fiction, but Torchwood likes to put its own spin on these things, so it's a good topic to tackle.
Stop wasting our time, we know you're an alien.
When we first met Torchwood 1 in Army of Ghosts, we learned all about how they love to appropriate salvaged alien tech for their own means. It was literally their mantra.
The Torchwood Institute has a motto: if it's alien, it's ours.
In that two-parter, it was entirely presented as a bad thing to use alien tech this way, but the spin-off show makes it a bit more nuanced with helpful alien tech, although most of the devices in Series 1 were definitely bad, and not exactly fun for anyone involved. With a show about an organisation like this, you always want to see them bust out their fancy sci-fi gadgets, so it's great when they bring out a mind probe with a spotty track record. The resulting scene is very intense and dramatic as they drill into her subconscious to look for the truth, each member having something to do as they desperately try to break her. I feel like Jack goes beyond simple bad cop here as he demands they go deeper, even though Beth is crying out in agony. You really do feel bad for her because she seems so innocent. This whole time she's maintained the same story and clearly doesn't know what's going on or why she's being targeted like this. As far as she knows, she's a perfectly ordinary human being with a normal life, so the scene is quite traumatic to watch, especially as the probe corroborates her honesty, making it seem even harsher to treat her like this. However, Jack's insistence on going deeper proves fruitful as the alien underneath is revealed, repeating her name, rank and serial number over and over again in the usual goofy sci-fi made up language. Those always sound silly no matter which franchise or how they're performed. I absolutely adore that Jack instantly knows exactly what's going on. That Beth is really an alien sleeper agent from the mysterious Cell 114 who like to do this kind of thing to invade planets, sending sleeper agents to scout. Jack is similar to the Doctor in that he's been around the block more times than he can count. He's been alive for centuries and travelled through space and time. He has a lot of knowledge he can tap into in moments like this and in Small Worlds where he explained the fairies to the rest of the team. He's their leader, so his expansive knowledge is incredibly useful in times like this, even if it does tend to become shameless exposition. At least it's not insulting exposition, because it does make sense in the context of him explaining all of this to his human teammates, who have no idea about any of it. There's also a great log from former leader Alex on the Torchwood website explaining how Jack knows so much about Cell 114. It's worth a read if you can track it down. The whole sleeper agent angle is even more terrifying than the original being alien without knowing it premise. You have no idea how many of them are already here, or how much they know about our planet and our people. Beth has already learned everything there is to know about Torchwood just by being in the hub, so God knows how much Cell 114 in general know or how widespread they really are. You have an impervious alien sleeper cell somewhere on the planet with no way to kill or eliminate them, so how do you stop them? That's what's so scary about this episode. You're completely in the dark against the unknown. The best the team can do is hope Beth is the only one. But, you know, these things never go how they want them to. Indeed, other agents activate across the city, giving you a better sense of scale as to the extent of this infiltration. It was hard enough for Torchwood to deal with Beth, but now there are countless of them. Remember, they all have impenetrable skin, so they can't be shot or stabbed. They're borderline unstoppable warriors. I especially like when David is activated because he becomes almost zombified and callously snaps his partner's neck completely unprovoked. There's a chilling coldness to his movements, really giving you that sense of not being in control of your own body. My favourite part about Sleeper is that they take the time to explore the human aspect of this storyline. It's all well and good telling the story about evil aliens hiding among us, but at the end of the day, their human disguise is just that, human. There's a clear difference between Beth and the sleeper agent, which is explored throughout, as Beth grapples with this reality of her whole life being a lie. The important nuance the episode focuses on is that it isn't a lie. Her love for Mike, her work, it's all real. She really did experience and continues to experience those things. Her original identity doesn't devalue those. It just essentially makes her two different entities inhabiting one singular body at the same time. The episode is sure to maintain a deep sense of sympathy for Beth without resorting to her just being evil because she's an alien. It's just sublime that they present this self-doubt and existential crisis. It reminds me of Karis in Day 1, where there was still a normal, innocent person underneath the possession. She was being piloted by something else and wasn't in control of her own body. Sleeper explores that concept further by focusing on the person underneath, and it really benefits the story by adding proper layers to it. All she wants is to be fixed. She doesn't want to die or be activated, she just wants to be normal, and that's what makes Beth's story so tragic. Imagine if that happened to you. You'd doubt everything about yourself, never trust anyone ever again because you're not who you think you are. You're actually an alien terrorist hiding in human skin. To say that might change your worldview would be just a little bit of an understatement.
I wish this wasn't happening. I'd never know, I just live a normal life.
Without any clear way of stopping Beth's activation or fixing her, they decide to freeze her in the hopes of fixing her in the future, or at least preventing her broadcasting her information. It's quite an emotional scene because the episode gave you that human side of her struggle for identity. She is basically accepting death. She'd rather die than hurt anyone else, which is very noble of her, showing how human she really is. Also, the scene is a clever way to set up the whole cryogenic freezing chambers, which come into play both in the next episode and the finale, and it just makes me wonder if they have Walt Disney in one of those. However, after her brave sacrifice, Beth actually escapes from the morgue. I love the sheer confusion of the Torchwood team because they have no idea what she's up to. They work out her vitals with yet another false image, but they don't know why she hasn't just killed them. I love seeing them so confused and lost. It's always a good reminder of how imperfect they are. They're flawed and they fail a lot, so it's a good story beat to have them on the back foot when they're in unknown territory. This time they're lucky, because Beth's true reason for escaping was just to see Mike again in the hospital. This once again reflects the humanity of the story. She's not activated and become evil, she's not trying to run away from Torchwood, she just wants to say goodbye to the man she loves before she gets frozen, which you can sympathise with. It's a very touching scene, even if the acting isn't that great.
Can it end up hurting you? Well, this is hurting me.
However, in a cruel twist of fate, just as Beth is trying to leave Mike to avoid hurting him, she unknowingly stabs him right through the chest, exactly what she was trying to prevent. It's so tragic and you genuinely feel her pain as she watches him die. It further shows how little control she has over this alien side of herself. She just wants to be normal, but because of her programming, that side will always take precedent. It's utterly heartbreaking because of those earlier scenes, and it wouldn't have nearly the same impact otherwise.
I know I love Mike. And he loves me.
He does, and you do.
Across the city, the other agents begin enacting the grand plan, killing and blowing things up. It's a pretty scary sequence because of the implied scope back when they were activated, although I will admit it's pretty goofy when David is killing Patrick Granger. This entire time the team was worrying about the invasion beginning, but now they're in the middle of it, since all these agents are taking out key targets to destabilise the city and make it easier to invade. It shows how powerful the sleeper cell tactic is, and why it's such a major fear to national security. Obviously, it's never how these shows present it, where a trigger word will suddenly transform Joe the janitor into ISIS John Wick.
All I said was good morning. Precisely. The code.
But sleeper cells are still a legitimate tactic, since they make sure the chain of command can never be traced, meaning the threat is always imminent. The consequences of not being able to stop a cell are pretty much what we see playing out in the episode. All these suicide bombers and hitmen, a deadly game of whack-a-mole. However, luckily for Torchwood, they managed to prevent Beth from activating, so they can use her to trace David before he can complete his mission. It's all a very climactic sequence of terror and fear, even temporarily cutting Jack and Gwen off from the rest of the team, which leads to a lovely Yanto moment.
Everything, absolutely everything. No phones, phones all broken. Hello? Anyone there? No, because the phones aren't working.
I do wish the team remained cut off for longer to keep them all in the dark and in disarray, without knowing what their own plan is, but I guess it's just a consequence from the iffy pacing of the episode. It turns out David's target is an abandoned coal mine storing 10 nuclear warheads in the middle of Cardiff for some reason. I've always loved infiltration plots where someone's weapons are used against them, and this is exactly Cell 114's plan. Control the nukes, control the planet. It makes the invasion so easy, all with simple sleeper agents. The real invaders don't even need to get any blood on their hands. It's a brilliant villain motivation, essentially turning this into the Torchwood episode with the biggest stakes up to this point. Obviously not counting End of Days because that was the finale. It's no longer a question of stopping the cell from activating. It's now a a mission to stop the entire planet from being blown up and taken over by aliens. However, despite these massive implied stakes, it doesn't really feel the same on screen, since the guy they're chasing is just some ordinary bloke driving a Land Rover. Despite this, he essentially becomes Terminator, taking bullets like they're nothing, and easily overpowering the soldiers at the mine, just going on an absolute warpath. It's very goofy, but very fun, since he has this massive arm sword and a vacant stare the entire time. So now Torchwood is in this difficult position of needing to save the world from an alien Terminator sleeper agent who can't be shot or stabbed, so what do? Oh, they just suddenly run him over. Huh. That was easy. Regardless of this sudden solution, I absolutely adore that Torchwood has become known to sell 114. Torchwood's main advantage is that they pick off stray aliens with the element of surprise, but this time they're being introduced to the terrifying prospect of an entire invasion fleet having extensive knowledge of the team and exactly how to stop them. It all leads up to this incredible line that always sends a chill down my spine.
Now when are the others coming?
They're already here.
What a way to immediately make this a shallow victory for the team. They've merely papered over the cracks, and because of how sleeper cells operate, there's no way for them to find out who or where the next threat lies. David is a dead end, especially as he blows himself up to stop them from getting more information. I guarantee this explosion was only done so the budget could have some more explosions to go boom boom and look good. Now that the immediate threat has been defeated, the protagonist prepared to put Beth into cryostasis again. This is a very good scene between her and Gwen, because they still don't know how to fix Beth, and probably won't when she wakes back up. More than anyone else, she knows her control is slipping more and more. She couldn't stop herself from killing Mike, so what will happen the next time her alien side takes over? Gwen has always been the most human member of the team, so she's the perfect one for this scene as we get a final exploration of Beth's humanity. She has such intense guilt she can never live with, and the worst part is that she knows her sleeper side won't feel guilty anymore. It's not just killing Mike, she feels responsible for all the deaths the other sleepers caused. It's all weighing on her shoulders, so you can definitely understand why she just wants to die while she still knows what it's like to be human. Indeed, Beth takes Gwen hostage and refuses to be frozen, prompting a standoff between the alien and the alien hunters. Gwen rightfully points out that she is just baiting them into killing her, but they can't take that risk, they have to put her down, like Jack says.
She just wanted to make it easier for us.
It's a very emotional scene because we've followed Beth's identity struggle, so it's very brave of her to do this, signing her own death warrant in order to prevent greater suffering in the future. It takes a lot of humanity to fight that sleeper programming and let them shoot her. All she wanted was to be human, but over the course of just a couple of days, her life has been turned inside out, and her entire sense of self revealed to be a lie. That's the true tragedy of it all. The other agents had no, well, agency, but Beth did. Thanks to Torchwood, she was able to cling on to just a few more hours of her identity and stop the sleeper plan. But she can never escape that awful guilt. She knew the only freedom would come from death, and the fact she embraces that makes her a human above all else. She might have thought she wasn't human enough because of that alien side, but much like Gwen said earlier in the episode,
What makes us human? Is it our minds or our bodies?
The episode then ends with a nice bit of post-action like a lot of Series 1 episodes had done. After all the chaos, it's good to check in on the emotional aftermath for our main characters, to see how they reflect on events and the lessons they learned. However, this post-action presents one of my biggest issues with the episode, which, to be honest, is a bit unfair because it's not this episode's fault. David had alluded to Cell 114 already having begun the invasion, implying there was more to come of this storyline. This final scene further pushes that idea because they now have to prepare for whenever that day comes, even though they do have crucial intel on how the species operate. It becomes a worse episode in retrospect because nothing was done afterwards. It would take almost 11 years for the story to be revisited in a Big Finish audio drama, but this TV episode had felt like part 1 of a multi-part story, like it was setting up for something later in the series. That feels like the biggest issue with Sleeper. It kind of just ends just as it gets going, and then never gets picked back up again in the show, so it sticks out and feels a bit like a loose end. Even with that later resolution, it will always be a rather undeserved black mark against the episode. You just can't have a villain tell the protagonist and the viewer that the danger is only just beginning, just for that danger to never arrive. Sleeper is one of those weird Torchwood episodes where it's really good in some places and not so good in others, which means it ends up quite middling overall. I absolutely adore how it explores Beth's humanity and battle for control over her own mind and body, adding a lot of layers to her as a person. It leads to some very emotional moments that wouldn't work without the connection it forms between you, the viewer, and Beth as she goes through this nuanced struggle. However, the episode suffers from some dodgy acting, and the pacing isn't great. It's pretty stop-start throughout, and when it finally starts to get going, it abruptly ends, so it would benefit from being a two-parter. The whole alien sleeper agent concept is an exceptional plot for Torchwood to explore in its own unique style, and sets up some great stakes. Although, as I mentioned earlier, the stakes end up being a bit too high, since it was never resolved on screen and ended up a painful dangling loose end. On a Series 2 tier list, I would place Sleeper at a C. Colin Teague's directing is slick and enjoyable, and the story is a good exploration of mature concepts like terrorism, without being overly gratuitous or edgy like Series 1. The practical effects are utterly magnificent, especially with the explosion in the middle of Cardiff, which feels so authentic, a truly stellar job by the effects team. There's a lot to love about Sleeper with how it handles the cast and the story, but there are some glaring issues that can't be overlooked. Sadly, there's no hiding from the fact it's one of the most forgettable episodes of Series 2, but that's mainly because of how good the rest are. It gets lost in the mix a bit and doesn't leave much of an impression over time. It's by no means a bad episode, and you can understand how it landed the Fires of Pompeii gig for James Moran, since it's a tight script with some great moments. It just suffers from those pacing issues and the lack of a follow-up. As fitting as it would be, it's sadly not the sleeper hit of Series 2, but it's still enjoyable for what it is.
Let's all have sex.
And I thought the end of the world couldn't get any worse.
And I'd like to give a very special thank you to all my gold level patrons: Alex Marston, Calvin, Daniel Shillito, Franz Horn aka Line Vortex, George, John, Ross, Stephen Nevin Miller, and William Jewell. Thank you so much for your support.